Talking to stones in Sopot, Bulgaria. Sopot reminds us of a time when everything was bigger. This megalithic site is so huge it can be seen from space. This stretched out pyramid looks like a giant Toblerone bar, triangular and long. Listening to the stones in Sopot tells us about an ancient forgotten world where the sea level was much higher and humans were very different from today. It takes us back to a time before the birth of civilization, to an earlier epoch of humanity. What we discover here in Sopot could change forever the way we look at the very ancient history of our planet and its earliest inhabitants. To understand what the stones of Sopot are telling us, we need to listen to the position and location of the rampart, as well as the shape and composition of its stones. The rampart of Sopot stretches 5 kilometers in length, east-west, and 800 meters in width. It is only one section of a string of similar megalithic sites. Sopot rises 120 meters high from base to the top of the ridge. The northern slope of the rampart is much steeper. It has a 50-degree incline, which is similar to the north side of the double pyramid of Ostrets that we have seen in a separate video. It also reminds us of the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. The southern slope is softer, with a 23-degree incline, and similar to what we found at the double pyramid of Banya and many other megalithic sites. The inclination matters. As we saw in Banya, Ostrets and other sites, the design of a pyramid is an integral part of its function. Sopot does not reach out for the sky like other megalithic sites. It has no summit. There is only a long flat ridge that is 10 meters wide. If you listen carefully to the stones of Sopot, you notice that they are positioned in parallel lines. There are up to 12 rows of stones, each constituting a level. Some levels are steeper and therefore more important. They are shown here as wider bands. The rows of stones are nearly perfectly lined up east-west, if it was not for a variation of a few degrees. Similar structures along this 20-kilometer line are also slightly off exact cardinal alignments. The position of the stones tells us that this megalithic site was built with intention. The location was chosen specifically and the stones were laid out purposefully. And yet, compared to other pyramidal formations like Banya, Ostrets and Pesnupoi that reach up to the sky like a crescendo to connect to the heavens, the rampart of Sopot has only a long flat ridge that points to its earthbound mission. Sopot stands out by the simplicity of its design and the shape of its stones, and so by listening to what the stones are not telling us, we can better understand their purpose. There are no standing stones here, and there are no clusters of stones like in Rozovets, where we hear the geometrical tunes of pyramids and tetrahedrons. By comparison, Sopot bears no decorations. Its ascetic appearance tells us about its function as a rampart rather than a portal. The stones laid out in rows that you see piercing through the topsoil are made from gritty and porous red sandstone with quartz crystals. It is a quartz-cement mix. There is no blue-grey granite here. And there are no stones inlaid with quartz chunks. This implies that Sopot does not have the same energetic function as other megalithic sites. Its purpose comes from its size, position, and location. On the ridge of the rampart, the stones form undulating lines like the plates on a crocodile's back. They are white river stone. This white stone contains no quartz. It also emits a different sound. Each type of stone talks to us with its own voice. The rampart of Sopot is one of 3 latitudinal bands of megalithic structures that are lined up 8 kilometers deep on a north-south axis. Sopot is on the first line. It is the northernmost point before the Danube plain. Moving south, the megalithic sites seem to culminate towards Ostrets. There is a separate video on the double pyramid of Ostrets. The second line of pyramidal formation is just 1 kilometer south of the rampart. It stretches over 30 kilometers east-west. These structures that face south have in some places little foliage, and we can clearly see the lines of stones that form the levels. Here there are 7 levels. And we notice in the bottom right-hand corner the stones laid bare by the daily routine of the grazing cattle. On a neighbouring pyramidal formation, we can see the parallel lines of stones that form the levels running east-west. These pyramidal formations have a particular shape with a double summit, one standing above the other in a diagonal line. This is one of many on this latitudinal band. With Google Earth, we can easily distinguish the outline of the pyramidal structures even through the foliage. You might notice that these pyramidal structures are slightly off an exact east-west alignment. They are around 5 to 7 degrees off east-west. It is the same angle of alignment as the pyramids of Plovdiv and many other megalithic sites in Bulgaria. Does it mean that they were built at a time when true south was in a different location compared to now? Could it help us date these megalithic structures? The third line of pyramids near the village of Micre is just over 2 kilometers south from the line of the rampart. It continues for at least 15 kilometers eastwards. These pyramidal formations face the second line of pyramids. The second line faces south, whilst the third line faces north. The pyramidal formations are lined up like the black and white keys on a piano. They have one summit diagonally above the other on a north-south axis. All these megalithic structures are connected. They form a network. Each structure has a precise location, position, and alignment in relation to the others. Together, they create a musical harmony that mirrors time and space. And so, when we embrace the sound of the stones of Sopot and Ostrets and Banya and many other sites north and south of the Central Balkan mountain range, we hear the rhythm of double summits and diagonal lines that ring true. What are the stones telling us? We will uncover the answer in the video on dating the megalithic sites of Bulgaria. There are similar structures up to 100 kilometers east of Sopot near Pushevo. The ramparts are lower and more eroded, but you can see the levels of the limestone as well as the limestone blocks on the summits hidden under the forest canopy. There is a possibility that these might have been built too, that they were heavily eroded by water over a long period of time. In general, in Bulgaria, we notice that if you go further east and south towards the Black Sea basin, megalithic sites are more eroded. I will explain why in the video on dating the megalithic sites of Bulgaria. Flying back to Sopot, we need to listen to the geography, the layout of the surrounding lands. When we stretch our necks to look above the rampart on the north side, we see the Danube plain that lays far below. The rampart stands tall at over 500 meters altitude. By comparison, on the north side, the Danube River and surrounding lowlands lay at around 50 meters above sea level. We realize that while there are numerous megalithic sites south of Sopot, marked here with dots, there are none on the north side in the Danube plain. The first remarkable megalithic site to the north stands on the Transylvanian plateau in the Bucegi-Prahova National Park in Romania, where you can see the Sphinx of Bucegi. It is nearly 300 kilometers away and stands at over 2,000 meters altitude. When we walk around the rampart, we realize that it was not built with any consideration for the lowlands below. It is as if they were not there, or they were not accessible, probably underwater. There are no steps, pathways, or access points between the rampart and the plain below. And so we can imagine, dream with our eyes open, what the region might have looked like when the builders raised this edifice. From northern Bulgaria to the Danube River and across to southern Romania, this entire plain at one time must have been flooded. This rampart was erected to stand above the Danube plain when it was still a sea. In those ancient times, the landscape would have been very different. The lower part of the rampart would have kissed the tides. The view from the top would have been one of a water world, like the fabled city of Atlantis hovering over the waves. We know for a fact from geological research that the Danube plain was flooded at multiple periods. There were times when the sea levels were much higher than now, over 100 meters at different periods. In the middle to late Miocene, the levels of the Paratethys Sea fluctuated at least 6 times, with plus 100 meters to minus 200 meters compared to today. And in between there would have been many flood events like mega tsunamis. The Black Sea Basin and its extension, the Danube Valley, was a conduit for the eastern Paratethys Sea into Central Europe. The high waters dug a channel between the Carpathian Mountains, where we see the Bucegi Sphinx, and Sopot on the edge of the Central Balkan mountain range on the south side. The Danube plain was flooded. This would explain the plethora of megalithic sites south of Sopot, visible here as bands of blue, red, yellow and green dots, in contrast to a complete lack of sites in the Danube Valley. These indicators point to the estimated period when the rampart might have been built. But I will discuss this in a separate video where I can compare different megalithic sites in and around Bulgaria, as well as more research sites like the Giza Pyramids, Machu Picchu and Stonehenge. It feels like the rampart of Sopot was built as a dike, a water fortification, to protect the south in order to hold back the waters, or at least break the swell of the waves coming from the north. This rampart is 450 meters above the plain below. By comparison, dikes in the Netherlands, a country built below the sea level, are only 8 meters higher than the sea they keep out. At the time when it was built, not only must the sea level have been higher, but also the threat of floods to all the megalithic sites laying south must have been greater. Sopot brings up images of a water world where the city of Atlantis hovers above the water at the whimsical mercy of Poseidon's wrath. The location and elevation of the rampart of Sopot tells us about its purpose, the reason why it was built. The fact that it is one of several such ramparts points to a greater plan, and the simplicity of its design and lack of standing stones confirms our intuition. The line of ramparts starting in Sopot marks a divide between north and south. They were most probably built to hold back the waters coming from the Danube basin. There was a time when sea levels were much higher. The Danube valley was flooded. It is possible that this epoch coincides with the Paratethys Sea, because since that time, according to geological research, water levels have never been so high. Sopot tells us the story of what the earth looked like when sea levels were much higher and the lands were prone to megafloods. And you can imagine the builders of these megalithic structures moving around from site to site over water. And it gives us a good indication of when sites like Rozovets, Pesnopoi, Striama and Plovdiv were originally erected.